What is up, guys? TEJ here, and in today's video we're going to be reviewing the brand new Mizuno JPX 923 Tour irons. So let's get right into it. Alright guys, so the new 923 Tours, this is actually the fourth iteration of the JPX Tour line from Mizuno. You had the 900s, the 919s, the 921s, and now the 923s. And although these do look relatively similar to that of the 921s, there are a few major changes, so let's go ahead and get into those. So the first main change in these new 923 Tours is going to be the implementation of the new Mizuno V chassis. And essentially what that is a design element in the cavity of the club that has allowed Mizuno to thin out the top line and yet still maintain the feel and vibration through the turf that they were looking for. So what you'll notice about these is that looks-wise, the top line is thinner, a little bit more blade-like, and feel-wise, it's a little bit more of a solid strike through impact, very similar to that of the 221s or anything more blade-like on the market. The second new thing about these 923 Tours is going to be the implementation of Mizuno's copper underlay. And essentially what that is a layer of copper underneath the outer chrome that should help make the irons feel a bit softer at impact. And aside from those two big changes, there's actually two more changes they've made in these 923 Tours. And the first thing they've done is they've changed the sole characteristics just a little bit. They've added a little bit of trailing edge roll to the back of the soles, and they've also added a little bit of bounce to the soles on these irons in hopes of improving turf interaction. Now, the reason they did this is because of tour player feedback. There were guys out there that were a little bit steeper and wanted a little bit more bounce to help the club not dig so easily, and so that's what they did in the 923 Tours. Another thing they've done in these is they've shortened up the blade length of the 6th through gap wedge in these irons. That is where Mizuno feels like these are the scoring irons, 6th through gap wedge, and so they wanted to make the blade length just a little bit shorter to help you be a little bit more precise on the shots you are trying to get close to the hole and make birdies with. So that pretty much wraps up all the major changes on these Mizuno JPX 923 Tour irons. From a steel perspective, you're going to have Mizuno's one-piece grain flow forged 1025E mild carbon steel forged in Hiroshima, Japan. That is a mouthful to get out, but that is what Mizuno is known for: the best, highest quality forgings and the best feeling metals in the industry. Now, the 923 Tours are going to be offered in 3 different set makeups. You're going to have 2 7-piece sets, 4 through pitching wedge and 5 through gap wedge, and then you're going to have an 8-piece makeup as well, which is going to be 4 through gap wedge. 4 through gap wedge will be offered for $1,500 US, and 4 through pitching wedge and 5 through gap wedge will be offered for $1,313 US. As far as the stock shaft, you're going to be looking at the Dynamic Gold 120 S300, but with that being said, there are plenty of other options through Mizuno's website if you need something custom to help better suit your game. Now, having said all that and kind of given you guys the lowdown on these 923 Tours, let's go ahead and get into my opinions on the irons. As far as looks go with these new JPX 923 Tours, I think they look really good. They give off a very premium or classy sort of vibe, just kind of sitting in your bag. The badging is not over the top. It's very subtle, very clean. Just kind of what I've come to expect from Mizuno. As far as shaping goes, really good looking set of irons from a shaping perspective. Not too rounded, not too squared off, kind of somewhere in the middle. Overall, I think from a shaping perspective, probably some of the best looking on the market. The new top line, a little bit thinner. I really appreciate that. I'm somebody who's been playing blades for probably the last 4 years or so, and so I do like a little bit thinner top line. That being said they kind of shortened up the blade length in the 6th through gap wedge. I didn't really notice that, and I'm somebody who doesn't really like super short blade lengths. They don't look too short, the 6th through gap wedge. So I think if you're worried about them being a little bit too small, I wouldn't worry. I think they look really good. Whatever they've done to those, they make the setup look really, really good. The other thing I absolutely love about these irons is the non-glare finish. Now, from a sort of retail perspective, chrome looks great. It looks great sitting on a shelf. But from a playability perspective, chrome is just terrible. It hits the sunlight and it reflects back into your eyes. And sometimes when it's really sunny, it is honestly hard to find the middle of the club face just because you can't see it. So I love the finish on the 923 Tours. I've always loved the finish on the JPX Tour irons, and these are no exception. They look great from a finish perspective. Now, with all that being said about how much I love the look of these irons, I do want to talk about something I don't love in terms of the look with the new JPX 923 Tours, and that is going to be the offset in the 7 through pitching wedge. I feel like there's a little bit too much, and I sort of look at it like this. You got the 221s, which are blades, the most player style iron, and then you've got these right underneath it. And with all the refinements they've made to make these more blade-like, I wish they would have reduced the offset in that 7 through pitching wedge. Now, it's not terrible, it's not offensive by any means, and the finish does a pretty good job of hiding it, but as you get up close, you can definitely tell that it is there. Moving on to feel, and these are a very nice feeling iron out of the middle of the face. Exactly what I've come to expect from Mizuno. I would say you have a very soft yet solid strike out of the center, which I did really like. One thing that did disappoint me though about these irons from a feel perspective is as you started to mishit them. Now, hair heel, toe, or thin, and I noticed that any soft feel that was there dropped off pretty significantly. And I'm not saying that irons should feel great as you mishit them, but especially given the fact that these carry the Mizuno name, you've got that copper underlay, I just would have expected them to feel a bit softer on those mishits. And from a feel perspective, I just think they lacked a little bit of softness around the entirety of the face. Moving on to workability, and that is where I absolutely loved these JPX 923 Tour irons. Usually as you get into more cavity back style golf clubs, you see a definite drop off in workability in comparison to that of a blade. But with that being said, they've made a lot of changes to make these irons more blade-like, and so from a workability perspective, I feel like these lived up to sort of a blade-style golf club. Whether it be hitting it high, low, drawing it, or fading it, I could do pretty much anything I wanted with these irons, and so from a workability perspective, I am a big fan of the 923 Tours. Getting into forgiveness now, and this is actually an area that quite surprised me about these irons. Now, you've heard me talk about it a few times. They've made some refinements to make these irons more blade-like, and so I expected them to be pretty unforgiving, but I found that not to be the case. It seemed like mishits traveled relatively far, dispersion left and right was not too bad, and so overall, a very decently forgiving iron. Now, by no means are these super forgiving. If you struggle with face control, if you struggle with contact control, these are probably not going to be the best iron for you, but at the same time, I found that they held up with some of the best players' CBs on the market, and so for who these are made for and how they're designed, I think they are pretty decently forgiving. So the next area I want to get into with you guys is going to be turf interaction, and this is actually a pretty interesting one for me. So I'll be honest with you, at first I was struggling turf interaction wise with the 923 Tours. It's been firmer outside, I was getting a little bit shallow, and the higher bounce aspect seemed like it was making me catch a decent amount of shots 1 to 2 grooves thin. That being said, I wanted to give it a little bit more time. I thought that was only fair of me, and I'm glad I did. The course started to soften up over the last few days. I started to get a little bit steeper, and the turf interaction has been absolutely superb. I've been catching golf balls more in the middle of the face, which, as you know, with Mizuno is just an incredible feeling. So turf interaction-wise, I think it really depends on the type of player you are. If you're a little bit shallower, you play in firmer conditions, these soles might not be great for you. I love the width of them. They're not very wide at all, but they do have a little bit more bounce than the last model. That being said, if you're a little bit steeper, you play in more wet conditions, maybe softer conditions, if you will, these soles could be absolutely incredible at helping you catch the ball in the middle of the face, but not dig so easily. So with all that being said, I think that you got to make sure you test these outside before jumping to any conclusions. When you're spending $1,300 to $1,500 on a set of golf clubs, you want to make sure that they're going to work for you and the conditions you play in and the way you swing the golf club. All right, so the last thing we're going to go ahead and talk about with these irons is distance. And now normally this is not a category I get into with this style of golf club. Usually a lot of these players' CBs travel pretty much the same distance. They all spin about the same. They're all lofted about the same. But what's interesting with these is I actually found myself picking up around 1 to 2 miles an hour ball speed with these irons in comparison to my Wilson Gamers and around 3 to 4 yards of carry distance. So by no means are these a distance iron, but I actually found it interesting that these were flying a little bit further than my Wilson blades. It was a pleasant surprise and something that I thought was nice to see. All right, guys, so having said all of that and given you pretty much every opinion I can on these 923 Tours, I'm going to rate them a 9 out of 10. And for me, there's really two things that are holding these irons back. The first is going to be the offset in those shorter clubs, specifically 7 through pitching wedge. Now, 4, 5, and 6 iron, I don't mind the offset. I actually think the irons look really good. But as you get down into that 7 through pitching wedge, I think there's a touch too much offset, especially given the fact that these are the second most players iron in the Mizuno Pyramid. I would have just appreciated a little bit less offset. Additionally, there's a pretty big trend right now with OEMs that are really reducing offset in their players' CBs, and I think Mizuno should have followed that trend in these irons. The second thing is going to be the feedback on mishits. I think it's a little bit harsh. I think it's a little bit too firm. And I know they've made a lot of changes to make these irons more blade-like in terms of vibrations and feel. But overall, if you were looking for that, you would probably be looking at buying the 221s, not an iron like this. For an iron like this, you want them to be a little bit more forgiving. You want them to feel a little bit better on those mishits. And so I think I would have appreciated if Mizuno made these irons a little bit softer on those missed strikes. The only other thing I want to mention about these irons is going to be the soles. I really think you ought to try them outside and make sure they're going to work for the conditions you play in and your swing type. Turf interaction is a really important part of getting a new set of irons. Aside from that, though, a really solid release here from Mizuno. I think there's a ton of great attributes to these 923 tours, and I think overall, a ton of people are going to be very happy with these irons. For me personally, though, there were just a couple things that held them back from being rated even higher. Guys, that's a video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a like. Comment if you have any questions at all. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go ahead and click that notification bell, and also make sure you're following us on our other socials, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. We'll catch you in the next video. Peace.